So the question is, why is it so important for your child to eat well? So I mean, we all remember, scoffing down our white bread Vegemite sandwich in the schoolyard, just so we could go and run and play for the precious hour before we go back to the classroom. But is this really sustaining our kids in the way we need them to be sustained? That's the question. I'm just going to mute everybody, just so there's no background noise. But if you want to ask a question, just unmute yourself. That's totally fine. So my philosophy is that every mouthful matters. So how can we expand our kids' palate and ensure that they're getting the nutrients that they need to keep them going throughout the day? And we really want them to develop a love of good food as well. So the investment of serving diverse food across 1,000 primary school lunches will influence the choices that your child makes for the rest of their life, when they're a teenager, when they're a young adult. And it sets up a really healthy relationship with food. So that's why it matters. So for those who have already been in the Facebook group, you're probably sick of looking at me. You know exactly who I am, but I'm Lisa. And I've been a mother for 15 years, but I've been a kids nutritionist for 7 years. And throughout my work in the last 7 years, I've noticed a really strong theme of fussy eating in Australian children, which has led me to then specialize in this area. Because I really wanted to be able to help parents who are desperately seeking help and information and want to really help their child create better eating habits. Because there's no pill to fix fussy eating, but there are steps that you can take to overcome it. My practice is really holistic. What I do is I identify the root cause of feeding problems, and then I work with families to overcome these root causes to help their kids' bodies actually operate to its highest function. Because parents that have come to me with their fussy eating children have tried and tested every variation on the weeknight dinner that they could. But their child won't even be in the same room as a pork chop or a floret of broccoli. So as more and more parents have come to me with these issues, I've seen that parents are crying out for solutions. And across my years of practice, I've identified 5 key reasons why kids are not demolishing their dinner. And these are the 5 reasons that I see. Now, if you go to see a feeding therapist who's an occupational therapist or a speech therapist, they're probably seeing slightly different reasons, and they have a different lens on feeding issues. But this, in my practice as a naturopath and nutritionist, these are the reasons. So the first one, they aren't sitting at the table, which is a biggie. They're constipated. They've got a zinc deficiency, anxiety, and then PANS and PANDAS. So I'm going to go through each of these one by one. And then at the end, there's a chance to ask me questions about, if any of this rings a bell for you, if you think some of this might be the underlying problem for your child. So number 1, maybe the French were right when they said that eating was an act of ceremony. It's a moment to savor and enjoy, and getting your kids actually sitting at the table is a crucial first step in eating. And, I've got my own kids. I get it. It's Tuesday night. You've got 3 kids under the age of 10 with completely different food preferences, probably fighting with each other as well. It's not exactly coq au vin by the Louvre. But if your child only eats on the sofa in front of their iPad, what is happening in their body? And what is happening to their experience of food? Their tummy is all squashed up. There's no room for the broccoli to even get in there. They're focusing on the screen. They're not savoring their food, the different flavors, the different textures. And they're not even seeing the foods except the ones that they are choosing to eat. Because kids need to be exposed to foods before they can eat them. And they're not enjoying the social event of dinner time. It's not exactly a dinner party of your dreams, but it's a stepping stone to happy family meal times. And also, when your child is just focusing on a screen, they're not chewing right. They're not thinking about swallowing. The signals going from their brain to their stomach to digest their food are not going to be strong. And ultimately, that will lead to constipation and poor digestion. So I had a client, Poppy, and she was doing this. She was eating every meal on her iPad on the sofa because her mother realized that this was a surefire way to get the dinner into Poppy. So she couldn't eat without it. But the first thing that we did was we had to get rid of the iPads. It's a really important part of the process of getting your kids to eat well. So if you think this is the reason that your child is not eating well, get up at the table with an adult, get rid of the devices, and develop the ritual of family meal times, just like the French do. Number 2, it's a biggie, constipation. And it's a major blocker to eating well. And it's a very uncomfortable position for your child to be in. And it's a major problem for fussy eaters. And it's part of a vicious cycle that your child can get stuck in. So what happens is your child might not be able to do a poo for a few days, which makes their appetite drop off. And that's very unpleasant for all of us. So the natural thing for a parent to do in that situation is just to give the child whatever they will eat in that uncomfortable state. And the food that they give them is invariably going to be things like milk, bread, and crackers. But what do these foods do? They make your child even more constipated. And so it's very easy for children to get into this vicious cycle of being constipated, comfort eating with the foods that lead to constipation, and it goes on and on. So I had a client called Lucy, and she was a 5-year-old girl, as a lot of my clients tend to be 5 years old. And her mother brought her to me because she was eating so few foods. She'd really self-restricted down to a very narrow range of foods. Plus, she was on a laxative. So she was on Osmolax every day, and she couldn't poo without it. The only meat that she was eating was KFC chicken nuggets. There were no veggies and there were no fruits. And what blows my mind is that she wouldn't even eat hot chips. And I know as a naturopath, you're not exactly striving for your kids to eat hot chips, but it's very difficult for a family to go out for dinner and just to enjoy a dinner out at a restaurant if your child won't even eat chips. So in an ideal world, so if I didn't know about the complexity of fussy eating and I had a child come to me like this, I would just say, well, just increase her vegetable intake, increase her fruit intake. That will stop the constipation, which of course it would, but we were so far away from that. So we had to start with probiotic supplements, prebiotic supplements, had to actually get her pooing before we could work on increasing her food range and her food intake. So ask yourself, does your child actually do a poo every day? If they don't, and they're a fussy eater, you need to address the constipation first. So you're aiming for 1 to 2 poos every day. That's a happy place to be. Then you can start to reintroduce the real food, the foods that won't constipate them. So the fruits, the veggies, the nuts, the seeds, beans, all of those things. So addressing constipation is another crucial step on the way to a balanced and broad diet for your child. Number 3, don't we all love oysters? So what I say about this is if you're not looking for a problem, you're not going to find it. And so I'm talking about zinc deficiency in kids. I took my daughter to see the doctor recently, and I said, can you test her zinc? And the doctor said, oh no, kids in Australia are not deficient in zinc. So, okay, aren't they? Because there's a lack of data. So we're not actually testing enough kids in Australia, testing the zinc in their blood to say if they're deficient or not. But there has been some research by the University of Otago which is in New Zealand, in 2011. And it does suggest that toddlers are at risk of zinc deficiency, plus old people, but obviously we're more concerned about toddlers tonight. So toddlers in Australia do tend towards zinc deficiency. And the other group that definitely do tend towards zinc deficiency are vegetarians. And although your child may not have proclaimed themselves as vegan or vegetarian, a lot of fussy eaters will naturally avoid meat because meat is very difficult to chew unless you've got a very well-developed rotary chew and you know what you're doing. Meat is difficult. So a lot of fussy eaters won't eat meat. And I do blood tests and I do hair tests for most fussy eaters that I see. And I do see a lot of kids that are deficient in zinc. And even if they're not deficient according to the range on the sheet, they're definitely at the very bottom of the normal range. So where do we get zinc? Oysters. So, okay, it's a pretty big leap from chicken nuggets to oysters, and we're definitely not going to get there overnight. Most adults that I work with can't even eat oysters, but you do get zinc in lots of meat, fish, whole grains, nuts, seeds. But the problem is the zinc that's in whole grains, nuts, and seeds, that zinc is not very well utilized. To be absorbed in your body, zinc needs animal protein with it. And plus, vegetarians eat a lot of foods that are high in phytates, again, the whole grains, the nuts, the seeds. And phytate is an anti-nutrient that will also stop you absorbing the zinc from your food. So vegetarians need about 50% more zinc than meat eaters. So you're kind of getting the double whammy with fussy eaters, that they're not getting any zinc, but they actually need more zinc than your average child. We need zinc to make stomach acid so that we can actually digest our food and we don't get constipated. We need zinc for sensory modulation, so we don't fly into a panic whenever a food is too hard, too slimy, too soft, too smooth, too crunchy. And we need zinc to actually smell our food and taste our food. Plus, giving a zinc supplement will actually stimulate your child's appetite directly by something called neuropeptide in their hypothalamus in their brain. So to give you a great example of this, we've got Jack, who is another 5-year-old, but this time he was a boy. And he couldn't even look at a new food without having a complete meltdown. So he couldn't be in the room with foods that he didn't eat. So we couldn't actually start feeding therapy, because if you can't be in the same room as a food, it's very difficult to actually start feeding therapy. So we started with some zinc. We actually started with a zinc cream, a transdermal zinc for him. And within a week, I was getting messages from his gobsmacked mum, and she was saying he was stopping having meltdowns at dinner time, and he was able to actually sit at the table with the rest of the family who were eating, their broccoli and their pork chops. So he was now able to see the other foods. He was able to smell the other foods without panicking. So, of course, eating a new food takes a lot longer, but you definitely can't eat a new food if you can't even be in the same room as the food.
No.
So all the processes, I'm just muting, all the processes that our kids need to eat well rely on zinc. This is like the golden ticket to support all the biological processes your child needs for eating a varied diet. Number 4. Now you're probably hearing this word in every second appointment that you go to with your child these days. And unfortunately, you're going to hear about it again because it is very important for fussy eating, and it's anxiety. So you're thinking, how can we link anxiety to everything that's going on with our kids? But it is a major consideration for fussy eaters. And definitely it can be a factor that's blocking your child from expanding their palate. But interestingly, eating problems in toddlers doesn't start with anxiety. Children under 3 don't have the capacity to become anxious about meal times and anxious about food. So there's always a different underlying issue to start off with. But anxiety can develop because of the behaviors and the situation at the dinner table and at meal times. So years of stress, coercion, even force feeding at the dinner table can mean that your child will develop anxiety about food. So, for example, if Alice is scolded every time that she doesn't eat her broccoli at the dinner table, she'll start to associate being at the dinner table and broccoli with being scolded and being reprimanded. And then she'll develop anxiety around food, but specifically around the broccoli that she's being, coerced or forced to eat. So she probably wasn't eating the broccoli in the first place because she had a zinc deficiency or because she was constipated. And she probably still has that reason, but now she's also anxious. And funnily enough, zinc also helps with anxiety. So that's good. So a prime example of this was a client of mine, Simon, who was 8, and he only ate 7 foods. So he was actually very thin and got sick a lot. And the majority of the fussy eaters that I see are not underweight. The majority of them are normal weight. So he stood out because he was actually very thin. And he looked malnourished, and he actually was malnourished. But his dad was very old school. He was like, eat your dinner or you'll starve. And unfortunately for Simon, he was heading down the starve path, because if you've tried to, starve your child into submission and get them to get really, really hungry so they're not fussy anymore, you'll know that that really doesn't work. So things were heading down the starvation path. So whatever the underlying reason was that Simon didn't eat in the first place, that was now eclipsed by his absolute fear of coming to the dinner table and being shouted at and being belittled by his father. So now he was absolutely anxious about eating. So we had to address the anxiety so we could get him back at the table. If your adrenaline is up here because you're really stressed about meal times, then your appetite is way down here. It's another classic vicious cycle, because we do these things, our child becomes anxious about the foods, and then some parents will just stop offering the food. So if you present your child with sweet potato every night and they start to cry and they run away from the table, the natural thing is to stop presenting them with the sweet potato. But to the child, what you're actually saying is that, gosh, yes, that sweet potato is terrible. It's making you anxious. It's actually a threat. So we'll remove the threat. So the child thinks, okay, it was a threat. Otherwise, my child wouldn't have removed it. Then the child becomes deficient in nutrients, their gut health deteriorates, and then that contributes to anxiety. So you're in another vicious cycle. And again, there's no quick fix for anxiety, but there are techniques that you can learn. You can learn about the structure of meal times, how to actually conduct a family meal time that's not going to be stress provoking, and at the same time, keep looking for that underlying reason why your child wasn't eating well in the first place. The last one, pandas. You may not have heard about pandas as a cause of fussy eating. And we're not talking about this cute little black and white bear. I'm talking about pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, which is PANS, and pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with streptococcal infection, which is PANDAS. And this is not going to be the reason why the majority of kids are fussy eaters. But in my practice, I see the extremely fussy eaters, the kids that are eating less than 10 foods. And I do see kids where the underlying cause is PANS or PANDAS. And in my membership, I've got a whole webinar on this because it's a big topic. But basically, it's where your child eats relatively normal, and then something happens. They get sick, they fall off a piece of playground equipment, they have a general anesthetic, something happens and they go on a food strike and they start to really reduce the number of foods that they eat to quite a serious degree. But at the same time, they might get really, really bad separation anxiety, really, really bad OCD, or they might even develop a tic, as well as lots of other problems. So if you're watching this and your child's eating changed overnight or over the course of a few days, then reach out to a PANS aware practitioner, such as myself, because the sooner you can treat this, the sooner you will resolve it. So if you've got stuck in a rut and your child is only eating a few foods, like their Vegemite toast or their chicken nuggets, there is a path out. But as you will have learned through this, forcing them, bribery, coercion is not the path. So the kids that I've spoken about, Poppy, she now enjoys conversation at the dinner table. She shares stories about her day. She talks to her parents, and she takes the time to actually eat her dinner. The little girl, Lucy, she's eating lots and lots of different veggies, fruits, different meats, and she's not constipated anymore. She loves her broccoli. Jack, the little guy who is having meltdowns, he did really, really well with a zinc supplement, and now he's starting to eat new foods because he can be in the same room as them. And the little anxious boy, Simon, I was able to work with his parents and help them see that actually they needed to change the whole way they were conducting their mealtimes and the language that they were using at their mealtimes before their child could actually eat better. So these children and their families did the hard work and made the changes, and now they're seeing results. And I honestly believe that the mainstream model for fussy eaters doesn't work. And I hear advice that parents have been given by their pediatricians, advice like he'll eat when he's hungry, or bizarrely, just give him a steak. I've heard that from several pediatricians. It's really just gaslighting parents and their concerns, and it's missing the opportunity to address the root cause and actually intervene early. So as I've said, there is no pill to fix fussy eating. But if you work out the root cause, then happy, healthy mealtimes can become a reality for your family. So these are the ways that you can work with me if you want to address your child's fussy eating. So there's 3 sort of levels of involvement. The first one is I have a membership called the Fussy Bunch. And in the membership, there's recipes, there's meal plans, there's monthly masterclasses on different topics like what supplements you need to give your child to help them eat better, how to help your child's gut health, how to help their immune system. And they're all specifically for fussy eaters. So the advice in those masterclasses is realistic for something that somebody on a limited diet can eat. Every month you get an ebook on a different vegetable. So the first month is beetroot, so you get coloring in, you get recipes, play activities, all the different things to do about a certain vegetable, so your child can drop their stress around those foods and learn how to interact with vegetables in a non-confrontational way. The second option is a year of the Fussy Bunch plus a one-on-one consultation with me. So it's everything that's in the Fussy Bunch, plus you just get an appointment with me so we can talk about what you might be specifically concerned about. And the final way is my one-on-one program, which is the Fuss No More method. So in that, it goes over 12 weeks. So there's 12 appointments with me, plus we do a stool test to see if there's something going on in your child's gut that's affecting the way that they eat. And we do either a DNA test or a hair test to look at other various contributors, plus you get access to the membership. If you have NDIS funding for your child, you very usually can claim that under the NDIS, under therapy other. And if you don't have NDIS funding, then you can pay in one go, or you can split it into 3 payments. So that's all the ways that you can work with your fussy eater and me to solve your problems. So now I will just unmute. If you've got questions, please. There's no questions in the chat box. So if you're happy to unmute, please just do that and hit me up with questions about anything that we've talked about tonight, or about your specific child, or anything at all.
I have a quick question about the zinc.
Yeah.
How do we know, or do we have a blood test for them to find out whether they've got zinc deficiency?
So there's a few different ways. If your child's okay with blood tests, then that's a free way to do it. But
never tried.
Not many kids are fine with blood tests. The other thing I do a lot of is hair testing. So you can actually take a sample of your child's hair, and we send it off to a lab in America, and it looks at zinc. It also looks at all the minerals. So, iron, molybdenum, sodium, potassium. It looks at all the minerals plus the toxic metals like lead, mercury, aluminium, all those sorts of things. So that is what I usually do for fussy eaters. But you can also look at your child's body and make a good stab. So if your child has a lot of white marks on their nails, so not just one or two, but a lot of biggish ones on their nails, then they're low on zinc. If they get things like, if they cut themselves and it takes a long time for it to heal, that's another sign of zinc deficiency. If they've got stretch marks, like if they're a teenager and they've got stretch marks, or if they're a teenager and they've developed acne, other signs of zinc. And if they just get sick all the time, then they can be low on zinc.
Okay, thank you.
It's okay. Just unmute yourself, anybody, if you've got a question.
Sorry, can I ask another one?
Absolutely.
I always have zinc deficiency in myself, so I have to take a lot of supplements for that. Do you reckon it might be a stupid question, but could it be hereditary? Would they potentially be zinc deficient because I always am? And
yeah, I mean, it depends on why you are zinc deficient, which is always the question, what the root cause is. Do you eat meat?
Yes, I do. Yes, probably once or twice a week, mostly. Not red meat particularly.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be red meat, but I'm a meat fan. I'm sorry if you're a vegan listening to this, is going to be hard to hear, but I'm a kind of meat once or twice a day sort of a person to get decent levels of zinc plus iron plus B12 plus other things. But sometimes people who are even eating that well don't have enough stomach acid, or their digestion's just not strong enough to break down the zinc and the different, nutrients in the food. And that could definitely be, hereditary, sort of that weakness in your digestion. Some people even have a bacteria in their stomach called H. pylori, which makes their stomach less acidic and therefore doesn't break down the zinc. And that is a family bacteria. Like usually it's not a hygiene thing. It's just a bacteria that takes up residence in your stomach. And generally, if one person in the family has it, most people have it, because just hugging, all that sort of stuff. And then there's something called pyroluria as well, which is an actual genetic predisposition to have high copper and low zinc. So, and it is more common in people who have depression, anxiety, ADHD, all those sorts of a thing.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my son has ADHD and autism, so that's why he's a fussy eater.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so it'd be really interesting to do a hair test and see if his copper is high and his zinc is low, because that can contribute to some symptoms.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So we've got lots of people. So if you have a question, I would bet my bottom dollar that somebody else is thinking the same question. So don't be shy, and you can definitely just type it into the chat box if you prefer.
interested to know why that would be the case with ADHD, like higher copper and lower zinc.
Well, why is often because you have pyroluria, which is the genetic thing. So are you wondering why it causes those symptoms, or why it's there in the first place?
Yeah, I guess what the relationship is really. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so zinc and copper are like a seesaw in your body. And if copper is up, zinc is down. So that's kind of when you have pyroluria, that's what happens. Copper is up, zinc is down. And zinc is really important for neurotransmitter production. So of your dopamine, your serotonin, all of those things require zinc as a cofactor. So if you don't have enough zinc, then you're missing out on making your neurotransmitters. Zinc is my favorite mineral because it's useful for so many things like fussy eating, ADHD, anxiety, immune health. Like it's really, and it's just not discussed. Like a doctor, a GP will never test your child's zinc. They will test their iron and they will give them an iron supplement. But again, I'm pretty certain if your child is deficient in iron, they're deficient in zinc because they come from the same foods and they're digested in your stomach in the same way. So doctors just have a blind spot for zinc.
Mm.
That's interesting. Thank you.
That's okay.
Are there other is there foods that you should eat with zinc to help absorb it, or foods that you shouldn't eat with zinc laden food because it blocks it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So to absorb it, you need the animal protein, which is why meat, fish, oysters are the prime ways to get it, because you got the animal protein and you got the zinc together. And then you want to not eat the phytates with the zinc containing food. So not eating a lot of whole grains, nuts and seeds. So I've done, I sound like an absolute zinc crazy woman here, but I've done a lot of research, and countries like in the Middle East, where they are primarily vegetarian, the kids are zinc deficient because they're eating, a lot of whole grains, like a super duper healthy diet, you would say, a lot of whole grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, all these wonderfully healthy foods, but they're full of phytates, so they're stopping the zinc being absorbed. The other thing that zinc is good for is growth. So a child that's just not growing is often deficient in zinc, which is where a lot of the studies in the Middle East have been around, like slow growth in kids in relation to zinc deficiency.
In terms of zinc supplements, would you recommend any that you buy over the counter?
So the problem with zinc supplements is that if your child is deficient in zinc, they will taste the zinc supplement and think it just tastes of metal. So what I do is I start kids on a zinc cream, so a transdermal cream, which you rub it a little bit on every night and it gets absorbed through their skin. And then after about 3 weeks on that, their zinc levels have come up enough to actually be able to tolerate taking an oral zinc supplement. Having said that, yes, in the supermarket, or not in the supermarket, in the chemist, there are some decent zinc supplements. One of them is called Zingles, I think.
Oh, I know those. They're good.
Yeah, it's the Metagenics brand, but in the shop, it's called something that's just escaping my memory. But you want to get, if you buy a gummy or those multivitamin gummy things and you look at how much zinc is in it, it will be 1 milligram, which is absolutely pathetic, useless. For like a 3-year-old, you want to be on about 7 milligrams, older about 10 milligrams. So yeah, you really want to look at the dose and the form as well. Like you can get, zinc oxide is not as good as, say, like zinc citrate for absorption.
Okay.
What about anybody else? Mary, Ashley, David, Maria, Brigitte, Cynthia, Julie, any questions? There's no such thing as a silly question. No. Okay, well, if you don't want to ask a question now, and you're already in the Facebook group, go ahead and ask it there. Or, oh, hang on. Oh. Yeah, thanks, David. This is my contact details. So admin@thepediatricnaturopath.com.au, and that's my website, which has lots and lots of helpful information on it about fussy eating, but also about lots of different things like, you know, ADHD, constipation, everything like that. Okay, you've got an appointment with me tomorrow. Cool, I didn't realize that. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for asking questions. It does make it a lot more interesting for everybody when there's some questions. So I'll count to 3 and then I'll end it. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully I'll talk to some of you soon. Thank you.
Bye.